Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Casey Research's chief strategist, Marin Katusa, doesn't believe sanctions will have much effect on Russia. Mish Shedlock from Sitka Pacific Capital Management thinks Europe will pay if Putin continues to feel threatened. We'll talk to Marin Katusa right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Sitting in for Phil Mackesy, here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Marin Katusa, Chief Investment Strategist for Casey Research, focusing, I think, right now on, there's a little bit of a mess on a little piece of land between Russia and Ukraine, and people are really worried about energy supplies. Russia supplies how much to Europe right now? About 60%?
Well, when it comes to overall Europe, it's a little over 35%, but the countries that are going to really be feeling the pain, when you look at countries like Finland, 100% is dependent on Russia. Poland, Ukraine itself, even countries like Germany, which have been increasing their dependence on Russian energy over the last 20 years, get north of 40% of their energy from Russia. So this is a major, major problem for the European Union.
Easy to talk tough then about what Russia has done on the eastern side of Ukraine, but if all of your energy comes there, or a good lot of it, I'm sure the Russians wouldn't mind leaving you cold and in the dark. They've done it to Ukraine before.
Well, the Russians, a lot of people, the media is trying to paint the Russians as in a negative light. In reality, the majority of the people in Crimea are Russian. They had a vote. Now, a lot of people are questioning the validity of the vote. Well, the reality is that this piece of area, when Peter the Great took it over, Khrushchev, who was Ukrainian himself in the 50s, gave it part of a deal for forgiveness to the Ukraine because of Stalin killing over 8 million Ukrainians. Khrushchev never expected the Soviet Union to fall apart, and when it did, Crimea went with the Ukraine, where its historical roots are actually with Russia for the last 200 years before that. Now, that said, why this is such a strategic, logistically strategic point is for 2 points. Number one, the Navy, and number two, the South Stream gas pipeline. This pipeline is going to go through the Caspian, and it's going to basically negate. So there's two major pipelines. One of them actually goes from Russia to Europe through western Ukraine. By creating the South Stream pipeline, which goes within the Crimea waters, the Russians do not need the Ukraine anymore. And that was a strategic decision that Putin did in the early 2000s, and that is why Crimea is so critical. So do I see him going and conquering other parts of Ukraine? No, because western Ukraine, there's no resources. It's mostly farming. And the reality is it's a very debt-ridden part of the country. So European Union gets a debt-ridden country, and on top of that, Putin gets the South Stream, which no longer does he need western Ukraine to sell gas to the rest of Europe. So the real conclusion here is higher energy costs for the rest of Europe.
Sanctions then don't mean much if they can cut off the oil and gas?
Well, there are absolutely no sanctions that Putin can worry about, because at the same time, what nobody in the West is talking about are the sanctions that Russia has now put on the rest of Europe. So the reality is the Europeans have a choice. Do they want to stay cold with no energy, or do they want to accept the new reality?
How long can he play a game like this? Is there any way the West can get around it?
The only way Europe, when we say the West, can get around it is if they start developing their own natural resources. The UK right now is the most advanced in all of Europe, and they are aggressively trying to explore their unconventional shale deposits for both gas and oil. There was a company there called Quadrilla, which just discovered in 2011 200 TCS of gas, which could basically fuel all of the UK for 2 generations. That is why the UK government is really pushing fracking and shale development, unconventional technologies development. The problem is the rest of Europe's a little bit backwards. They're a little bit too socialist. And if you look at what's going on in France and Spain, where they banned fracking, if you look at the failed green programs of Germany, where electricity is 3 times more than in North America because they're subsidizing the green energy, the reality is Mercedes and Volkswagen and BMW and Audi and the manufacturing hub of Europe cannot afford 3 times the price for electricity than North America if they plan to compete globally. So, there's a lot of potential within Europe, but they have to go and develop it. And right now they're about 25 years behind North America and about 30 years behind Russia. Remember that fracking has been going on in Russia since the 1950s. So the Russians have positioned themselves to develop their resources, and we even see in the offshore Exxon, which is, the West's largest oil company, and Rosneft, which is the East's largest oil company, are doing joint ventures in these very expensive northern water oil wells. So, can Europe do it? Yes, technically, but we're looking at a few decades away.
Putin has nothing to worry about then with these sanctions, or could he be hurt in any way by them?
Well, look, sanctions are never good for anybody on the table. It's like a street fight, and the reality is he's going to fight back at the end of the day. He's positioned himself. Look, Russia has almost a balanced budget. They've been increasing their gold every year since Putin's been in power, whereas the rest of Europe and the U.S., they're increasing their debt. So Putin's done what he's needed to do for the Russian state and the Russian people. And sanctions are never good, so it's going to hurt both sides. But at the end of the day, they need Russia more than Russia needs them.
Will Russia be trading this oil and gas for anything else but dollars, U.S. dollars?
It's already started. You're correct. That's pretty much the beginning of the end of the petrodollar. So people will say, well, then who's, when I make a comment like, why is Russia doesn't need the U.S. or the EU, and the Soviet Union fell in the 90s, so how can I make a comment like that? Well, back then, in the 70s, China and the rest of Asia was not where it is today, and now there's a new trading partner. And the Russians are very close to the Chinese, and they are already trading in energy with Iran and China and Russia, not in U.S. dollars, like the petrodollar was designed, but they've been doing it for other, almost in a bartering aspect, for gold, for agricultural products. So it's already started.
They're swapping.
Exactly. And that reduces the need for U.S. dollars.
What's going to happen to the U.S. dollar, the so-called haven, when there's trouble?
Well, you see, that brings it back to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was the anchor of the petrodollar. And when Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon convinced Saudi Arabia to trade its oil for dollars and then reinvest those dollars through its sovereign wealth fund into America and into America's growing technology and innovation base, it can go as long as people accept the trade. That's what a fiat currency is. As long as Saudi Arabia keeps trading in U.S. dollars, the petrodollar will have a major demand. The question is how shaky is the House Assad? And there's a lot of reason to expect that in the next 5 years there could be a lot of problems and revolution in Saudi Arabia.
Well, it's a country where there's no democracy, right?
Well, not just that. If you look at the king right now is over 80 years old. The next guy in line is 81 years old. The next guy, his brother besides that, is 78, and they're all very ill. Then you have over 7,000 princes who are jockeying to get that position in the next level. On top of all that, you've got Sunni and Shiite issues. You've got declining oil issues. There's a lot of problems that can happen in the next 5 years in Saudi Arabia.
I've heard it's one of those places, too, where it's hard to tell what's simmering because of their tight restrictions for who can be there and who can't.
Well, exactly. And with today's technology, with, the mass media, when I went to Kuwait and Iraq, and you see that every cab driver and every kid has a cell phone now, the game has changed. The Arab Spring showed that anything is possible.
What happens when people revolt in Saudi Arabia? Are the oil supplies to the U.S. cut off?
It doesn't matter in what country. When there's a revolution or a war, the oil production declines significantly. And that is a guaranteed result that if there is a revolution in Saudi Arabia, the number 2 oil producer in the world will probably decrease its oil production by $3 to $5 million overnight. Now, what's important for people to understand is most of the oil production comes from one field called the Guahar field. That's where half of their oil comes from one field. That's all on the east side, and that's a majority of Shiites. So the regime is Sunnis, and there's a lot of Sunnis on the west side of Saudi Arabia. But if there's a revolution, the first thing that will be attacked are the oil wells.
Oh, no. We saw what happened when Saddam decided to light up all the oil wells. Saudi Arabia could face that too?
Very realistically, yes.
Don't they know if you destroy your oil, there isn't much else around there to sell, is there?
Well, it's interesting. When you go to Saudi Arabia, they started originally for diving for pearls was a big industry. Then the Mecca, they have the three. That was a religious revenue for them, and then the oil came in mainly after World War II. So that is the majority of what's financing the kingdom. And if you have a revolution there, it'll be difficult for the kingdom to sustain itself with decreasing oil revenues.
And usually when a country's under revolution, your tourism drops. I know you're supposed to go to Mecca if you're a Muslim, but not maybe tomorrow if bad things are going on there.
You nailed it right on the head, exactly.
How are they going to deal with this threat, or are they capable of dealing with it?
Well, that's just it. They're not. When a revolution comes, you never know. No one's ever prepared for a revolution. And the reality is the one guaranteed conclusion that we're moving forward with, whether it's in Europe or Middle East, is higher energy prices. And the one way you can prepare for this is to position yourself in your portfolio to benefit from it.
I guess that means going after North American energy.
Not necessarily. I think that if you look at some of the big gains available, you want assets that people need. So if you're bringing modern technology to areas that are proven old oil fields, such as in what we were talking earlier about in Europe, there is a major need for countries like Germany and the UK to develop their own energy fields onshore, and they have them. They just haven't used it because the U.S. military has been subsidizing the rest of the world for cheap energy, hence the American involvement in the Middle East. That's significantly playing itself out negatively for the Americans and Europeans, and that is an opportunity, what I call the European energy renaissance. I also think that you're looking at areas, we've had a major success with Africa oil. We've recommended it under $1. It went to over $12, trading somewhere around $9 today. There's major oil fields out there that the majors are trying to replace their reserves that they have produced with, and they can't. Their reserve life indexes are decreasing. So there's a lot of opportunity. The energy world's a fantastic place to be invested in.
More with Marin Katusa next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Marin Katusa from KC Research. Russia, you're saying sanctions will just bounce off, that they're back, and when it comes to threats not to use their energy, well, they have so much of it, the prices they could offer would keep somebody else out, I would think.
Well, exactly. You look what, there's other customers than the Europeans. You've got China, even the Japanese are thirsty for energy right now. So Putin and Russia have a lot of options. If you just even look at the uranium, for example, most of the Western world is painting Russia in a negative light right now, but that's just our media. The reality is this. 1 in every 10 homes in America is powered by Russian uranium. Not American uranium, Russian uranium. That's 1 in every 10 homes in America. The Russians right now produce more uranium on American soil than all the American companies combined. That's an ironic result of the Cold War. The Americans import more uranium from Russia than they do from Canada. So let's really think about, it's not just in Europe. America itself depends on Russia. 1 in every 10 homes to be powered by Russian nuclear fuel, that is a strategic issue of weakness that Obama will never talk about. He doesn't want the media to know the truth. The Russians have slowly accumulated within their sphere of influence. When you take the former Russian states, the CIS, Kazakhstan, and what they've done now, the Russians have been buying up uranium assets around the world. They have about 40% of all the uranium deposits in the world are within their influence. About 40% of all the refining capacity in the world is within the Russian complex. The Russians and Putin have almost cornered the energy markets in the world. If a revolution happens in Saudi Arabia, there is no sanctions at all that will bother Putin. Oil will be over $200 a barrel overnight, instantly, and there is a new global superpower in the world, and that is Russia.
Well, there's 2 people in the world who like to ride around on horses without wearing shirts. That's Putin and Mr. McConaughey. Maybe we should send him to negotiate with them.
He'd probably do better than President Obama.
All right. We have a deal. With Russia sitting on top of this big energy pile, then all the noises we're hearing from politicians here, just noises?
It's just political lip service. The Americans are now trying to make it as if Russia is going to invade the rest of Europe. It's just political lip service so they can walk away and say, see, because of us they didn't invade the rest of Europe. We won. It's just political lip service.
Is there any place in Europe that Putin would feel like invading?
No, I don't think it's... See, Putin's a very intelligent, powerful, smart leader. This is not no military mission for him. It's about securing what's best for Russia. And what's best for Russia is to keep the rest of the world addicted to their energy supplies. War is not good for Russia because during the war, then the manufacturing base decreases, the GDPs will decrease. Putin is not a stupid man. He is much, much smarter than Obama. We see how the Russians outplayed the Americans in Syria. We have just seen in real time how the Russians have outplayed the Americans in the Ukraine. Again, Russia is doing what it needs to do, and because of the last 30 years of cheap energy, the rest of the world's been addicted to cheap Russian energy. Those days are over. Energy is getting more expensive.
Alternative energy just isn't up to snuff yet to take care of any lack of oil or gas?
No, the reality is it doesn't work without the government subsidies. So the green energy revolution, when Obama came in, he had this whole platform of hope and green energy. Well, what's Obama really saying now? Obama's trying to be a champion of shale gas. But if you recall, what he was first talking about was green energy. Well, how did that work? All of those companies went bankrupt. So the reality is it just doesn't work without government subsidies. So no, the world can't depend on it yet. Maybe one day, but not today.
People have said solar and wind power. I haven't even seen anybody use tidal power effectively yet. Look at BC, all those big tides that go racing by our coast. I don't think we get one little piece of energy out of it yet.
Well, just look at the windmill up at Grouse Mountain. Most of the time you see it still. So the reality is that the green energy is a great theory, but its costs today are not economic without the subsidies. Or do people want to pay 3 times more for their energy?
Is that possible? Well, you're saying that oil could hit $200 a barrel. That would provide kind of a basis for people to try to compete with it, or is even $200 a barrel more competitive than alternate energy?
Well, you see, every country is different. It depends on where your matrix is. At $200 oil, you'll probably see gas around the world go higher too. So now coal will come back in. Coal in North America has been destroyed by the shale gas revolution. And I think at $200 oil, you'll see a lot of investments made in all of the different variables within the energy matrix, including run-of-river, including solar, including wind, geothermal, but you'll also see it in nuclear, coal, and natural gas. So $200 oil will create a fantastic energy revolution from an investment perspective. And with that investment will come innovation and better technologies and hopefully lower costs for green energy. But we're not there yet.
So we have to be hitting us out of the head with these $200 a barrel oil prices first, huh?
Correct.
Isn't that why governments were trying to subsidize these other things, so at least we get our foot in the pond?
That was the strategy, but, at the end of the day, it's not meeting, look, again, it's just political lip service. Obama was all about the green energy revolution. It didn't pan out. So
between our $200 a barrel gas and developing new alternatives to energy, we're going to be just paying higher and higher and wait for what happens when we hit $200?
Exactly. Well, look, your energy bill is not getting cheaper. It's getting more expensive. The governments try to tell you that inflation is not happening. People are got to be kidding me. Look at Vancouver real estate prices. Look at the price of a loaf of bread. Go to the gas station. Look at your BC Hydro bill. Electricity is not getting cheaper. It's getting more expensive. And this is just the beginning. In Europe, for example, a lot of people here in Western Europe don't realize this, but there's countries, just say, for example, the newest country in the European Union, it's the 28th country in the Union, Croatia. I spend a lot of time there. Beautiful country, great people, great food. And the irony is that they make, let's say, about a third of what, let's say, a teacher in Vancouver versus a teacher in Croatia makes about 1/3 of what a teacher in Vancouver makes. But yet they spend 3 times more on energy than we do here in Vancouver. That is going to be the reality that North America will face.
Forget all those big Christmas light displays, huh?
You don't see those in Europe.
Yeah, I was in Paris during the oil crisis back in the 70s, and our so-called City of Lights tour was nothing but a bunch of dark, big buildings. And I think we might see that again.
I concur.
Marin, always a pleasure talking to you. Is there a website people could go to find out more about what you think is going to happen to energy prices?
Yes, we have Casey Research at CASEYresearch.com. We have a daily blog that we send out. It's called the Casey Daily Dispatch. And the energy one that I write myself is every Tuesday. It's free, and you can try out all of our subscriptions for a 3-month free trial. And if it interests you, have a read.
After the break, Mike Mish Shedlock on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
My guest is Mike Mish Shedlock from Sitka Pacific Capital Management. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Oh, pleasure to be back on.
Well, we were talking off air about our little new board game, Vodka Ukraine Risk. What kind of risk is this going to give us when it comes to the world markets?
Oh, the question is, what kind of bluffs are going to be answered or not answered? I did a post just minutes ago on buffoon bluffery. What are the sanctions really about? Obama came out today. He upped the ante. They put sanctions on more people in Russia. Russia counteracted. They put sanctions on, and prohibited travel from McCain and a bunch of other, does any of this mean anything? None of this means anything. It's all buffoonery. But Bonner said he's proud to be included on the list of those willing to stand against Boehner, and McCain said something similar the other day. But the big thing here was, President Obama, threatened to hit Russia where it's economically important. But of course, then we got this response from U.S. interests in saying, hey, what about exports? And so here we have these tit-for-tat discussions, and does any of it mean anything? And I ask the question, what are these things really about? And I think it's pretty clear here. Obama needs to preserve his ego, so does McCain, so does Boehner, so does Hollande, French President Francois Hollande in France. So everyone's proposing all of these things that Putin is sitting back there laughing at because they know there's going to be no follow-through. And yet, at the same time, I ended my post with a comment. Yet when dealing with fragile egos, no one never knows how insane things can get. Nearly any outcome is conceivable. But when it all comes to said and done, I suspect that Angela Merkel, perhaps David Cameron, maybe some officials in Austria, who is will be very, very affected by supply of natural gas, are going to put in some calls to Obama and say, hey, buddy, knock it off.
Well, Russia sits on top of a huge pile of energy, something like 60% of the world's oil, 40% of the gas. Europe is addicted to their product. They've been selling to China, Japan. Who's going to go and say, please don't give us natural gas for next winter?
Well, that's the problem. And it's not just next winter. You need natural gas for all kinds of things. Germany gets about 30% of its natural gas from Russia. Ukraine gets almost all of it from Russia. And so which threats here are realistic and which ones aren't? And it's so funny. France came out and threatened, to threaten to cancel its agreement to send warships to Russia. And I'm sitting there thinking, what does Russia need warships for? I don't think they need them all. If I was Putin, I would sit back and think, my God, this is a great chance to not waste any money on warships we don't need. But the amusing thing about this proposal from France was it was entirely dependent on the UK saying, well, the UK needed to punish financial transactions from Russia that flow through London. So France said, well, we'll do this if the UK does this. Who are these people trying to fool? You either say you're going to do something or you don't. I think Hollande is bluffing. Meanwhile, Cameron doesn't want any part of this. Merkel doesn't want any part of it because of natural gas. So we come out with all of this meaningless buffoonery that says, the U.S. is going to sanction more Russian officials, and Russia replied by sanctioning, saying, these people are no longer welcome in Russia. But look at it this way. What interest does Russia have in the United States? What are they going to do? None. What interest do U.S. companies, and think about it, think about McDonald's, Wendy's, I don't know what's there, but lots of U.S. companies are in Russia. So who is going to win this kind of trade war? It's not the U.S., and I think the whole world knows it. So what is this all about? And again, this all comes down to egos. Obama thinks he needs to respond. McCain thinks he needs to respond. Bonner thinks he needs to respond. They're all beating their chests, boom, 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 boom. But in the end, they're going to look foolish because they're going to have to back down. Either that, or as I said, one never knows when dealing with egos how insane things can get. Heaven forbid, some of these people, Obama actually follows through with what he said. Russia's going to imply in kind. No one wins. No one wins from this kind of nonsense.
The person who will be sharing your airtime on this show says the U.S. should be careful. 1 in 10 homes in the U.S. are heated by uranium that's controlled by Russians.
Well, that's a fact. I mean, I didn't know. I'm going to assume right now it's a fact, but this all goes down to just the simple economic theory that no one wins in a trade war. The McCain issued 11 proposals the other day. He wants to send missiles to the Czech Republic, and I'm sitting here thinking, good Lord, what the hell is that going to do? What is the Czech Republic going to do with missiles? Are they going to start a nuclear war? No, I mean, this is a ridiculous cost to the United States for which McCain didn't even propose saying how he was going to fund it. It's going to come from somewhere. And he had a whole bunch of sanction proposals. He had 11 proposals. He wants to send people to the Ukraine, to monitor events and set the facts straight. Well, obviously, the people that he wants to send to the Ukraine to set the facts straight are people who are going to report the facts as McCain sees them. So, but, here we are. His 11th proposal was we need to reduce Europe's dependency on Russian natural gas. And I'm saying, my God, out of 11 proposals, and this was his last one, this was the only one that made any economic sense. Eliminate Europe's dependence on Russian natural gas, and this problem is going to be diminished. Russia wouldn't be able to do some of these things because it needs to sell natural gas to Europe.
That's right. You want to stay friendly with your best customers, I would think.
Absolutely. Bingo. Stay friendly with your best customers. So, obviously, this is not going to be done overnight, but here, this is what I'm saying. So we're doing all of these counterproductive trade proposals. The only productive proposal to solving this problem, or problems of a similar nature, was not the curtailment of trade, but the expansion of trade.
Maybe if they went to the G8 meeting and kept the Russians involved with it, isn't it easier to talk over problems if you're face-to-face over dinner than it is sending diplomats that apparently have been banned from visiting each other?
Well, that sounds true in theory, but what happens when egos get in the way? This is really what it all boils down to. Obama has to preserve his ego. So does McCain. So does Boehner. McCain is willing to destroy Europe economically just to preserve his ego about what he thinks is right. I mean, these people learn nothing from the war in Vietnam, from the war in Iraq, from wasting trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan, from President Obama's indiscriminate bombing of Pakistan in the name of, preserving freedom. And we sit back, we criticize Russia. And so do I, by the way. I'm not trying to take a pro-Russian stance here. I'm just trying to look at this thing from both sides of the picture. Russia at least had an interest in Crimea, and it's also 100% crystal clear that the citizens of Crimea are predominantly pro-Russian. I believe the U.S. instigated the overthrow of the Ukrainian prime minister. I can't prove that, but I believe that. We oversaw the throw of the Shah of Iran. We've done all kinds of other meddlings in the Mideast and Central America, every one of which blew up. So I happen to believe these reports that say the U.S. instigated, the overthrow of the Ukrainian prime minister. So here we sit back and we say, this vote's illegal. Well, my God. At least it was a vote. Where does Pakistan have a vote on U.S. indiscriminate drone bombing that's killed and maimed thousands of Pakistani children in the sake of, actually it's in the sake of might makes right. We can do it and no one else can. the U.S. is the biggest hypocrite in the entire world. I have a lot of praise for the United States. We have the freest, most open markets in the world, but I'm telling you, when it comes to politics, we have the most inane people as president as anywhere else in the world.
We'll have more with Mish Shedlock next on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mish Shedlock. Mike, I've noticed China, who I've been told has no interest in starting a war somewhere. Their whole deal is it's all about business, whatever they can do to make business better. Is that why they haven't said much about Russia?
Pretty much so. I mean, when we had there was a vote, I believe, in the UN on this, and of course, Russia abstained, but interestingly, China didn't comment. It didn't make a vote. It didn't want to side one way or another. If we put U.S. drone bombing of Pakistan to a vote, what would happen? I'll bet Russia and China would disagree with it. I'll bet our allies would either agree with it or take a pass. But it'll never come to a vote, as the U.S. will veto it. The UN is really dysfunctional. A very, very close friend of mine, wrote a post, how he thought this was a big deal. Russia was violating a UN charter. They're a member of the G7 doing this, blah, 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 blah. And my comment is, look, buddy, get real. And it's precisely for what you said. If we look at this in terms of business, and I'm not saying, I would support any illegitimate business. I certainly don't believe in child trafficking or anything like that, or any other things. I believe in reasonable controls. Here we're talking about a situation where the U.S. fomented, or at least supported, actions against the Ukrainian leader. He was ousted in violation of Ukraine's constitution. Where is the U.S. discussion of this? There is no discussion of this. Yet, what the U.S. discusses is the election in Crimea was against the Ukrainian constitution. Well, excuse me, let's take this back to where it started. Where was the constitutional support for, overthrowing the Ukrainian leader? Again, I'm not supporting this guy. I'm not supporting Hussein. I was against the war in Iraq, but I certainly did not support Hussein. I mean, clearly, this man was evil. But was it worth $1 trillion US or more to dethrone this guy? And my answer is, of course, no.
Wasn't Crimea a gift from Russia to Ukraine, kind of to make up for the slaughter carried out by Stalin?
It's hard to say why Khrushchev gave Crimea to the Ukraine. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we'd have to go back and ask him, and of course that's really not possible. But bear in mind that I highly doubt that Khrushchev thought that any of this was coming. So as long as, all of this Soviet empire was in place, it really didn't matter how they shifted borders back then because it was all part of Central Russia. But ethnically speaking, that section of Ukraine was really Russian. Back another few hundred years, it was someone else. It was another country. If you look at 1,000 years of the European map and how it's changed over that time, any country can claim any border it wants. And the disputes are endless. But what battle of this is that of the U.S.? What, is Canada taking a side? I'm curious. Is Canada taking a side in this mess? If so, what is it?
Well, Canada's side is we have the world's third largest expatriate Ukrainian population in the world. So our government's very pro-Ukrainian because they know where the votes are.
Isn't that what it boils down to?
That's where the votes are.
where the votes are. It's all a matter of, actually I said it was all a matter of egos. Well, it's a matter of egos and votes. So let me amend what I said.
And one more thing too, Mike, I'd like to point out is I think, look at the way we cut up Africa and parts of Europe and Asia after all these major wars. And we put ethnic groups together who don't like each other and put them in one country. And now they're all trying to break apart. Why not just let people who speak the same language, who want to be together, be together?
That's exactly what I'm saying here. They put this thing to a vote. Of course, there's going to be some pro-Ukrainians in Crimea that are not going to be happy with the situation. And you know what? I feel bad about them. But 93% of the people, something like that, voted in Crimea when they had the vote, voted to go back to Russia. And people say, okay, the vote's rigged. Okay, let me agree. I'm going to agree flat out. The vote was rigged. What percentage do you want to assign to this? 75, 80, 60?
The overall result's the same.
It's overwhelmingly likely. I'm going to throw out a number. I'm going to say 82% of the citizens would rather be with another country. You know what? If the citizens of Maine, if Maine said, I want to be part of Canada, and Canada agreed, why do I care? I don't care. Now, obviously, some people in Maine might care, but if 80% of them said, I'd rather be part of Canada, do I care? Would the U.S. be willing to fight a war with Canada if Maine wanted
How good are the hockey players from there?
Are there any good hockey players in Maine? I don't know. You tell me. I'm not that in tune with hockey. But I'm going to guess there's not a lot of great hockey players in Maine. But anyway, I don't know. We need, what I'm proposing here is we need to step back and put ourselves in the other guy's shoes instead of our shoes. And we need to put ourselves in Putin's shoes. He sees a big threat from NATO, from people like McCain, that want to expand NATO in Georgia, in all of these other, former Russian satellites. And we're supposed to think that he's going to sit back and be okay with missiles in the Ukraine, U.S. missiles in Ukraine? I don't think so. Let's put ourselves in those shoes. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the people in Crimea who 85 to 93% or whatever number you come up with, but overwhelmingly would favor re-entry into Russia. Now, personally, I think they're wrong, but my opinion doesn't matter. Your opinion doesn't matter. Obama's opinion doesn't matter. That's what the people in this region believe. So, and they did it relatively peacefully. Hardly a shot was fired. If anyone was killed, we're talking about numbers in 2 and 3. Compare this to, the U.S. invasion of Iraq to impose an election upon Iraq, the most fraudulent election, in the history ever, and we pretend that election matters, but this election in Ukraine doesn't. So, I say,
and I could
give
see
me a
people,
break.
and I could see
Let's put ourselves in the other guy's shoes.
Mike, is there a website people can go to find out more about how you feel about Ukraine, Russia showing down here, or perhaps what this might do to the markets? And maybe the people who are interested in money, if they're smart, would just walk away from this, huh?
Certainly. I'll give you the long way, globaleconomicanalysis.blogspot.com, but the easy way to find me is just do a Google search on Mish. I've been talking about Ukraine recently But I've also talked about Bitcoin. I've talked about gold. I've talked about interest rates in the United States. I talk about the global economy. I talk about China, Europe. I expect Europe to break apart. So, you want to follow me? Just do a Google search for Mish. It'll take you straight to my blog. And thanks for mentioning that possibility.
Thanks to our guests, Marin Katusa and Mish Shedlock, and thank you for listening. I'm Jim Goddard for Phil Mackesy. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.